in my closing, may I grab 2 exhibits?
Yes.
May it please the court. Today you heard a story about a parent who ignored all the signs. Hayden Duran was the one who turned the safety off. And because of that, Sydney Park is dead. Mrs. Park will never be able to see her daughter grow up. You heard a story today. You heard how Hayden Duran had a daughter. She started off by playing regular games, but she began to be more interested in violence. She wanted more violent video games. Hayden Duran ignored the signs and bought her these. She then asked for first-person shooter games. He blew this off and bought her the video games. Not only this, but you heard that Hayden Duran was concerned about his daughter. You saw this today in the email that he wrote his friend. He ignored the signs and didn't take any action. You also heard today from Mr. Solo how he was sent home from school for fighting with other children. Hayden Duran at this point didn't get his daughter psychological help. He didn't get his daughter, he didn't ground his daughter. He didn't make any steps to ensure that she stopped this violent behavior. Instead, he decided to drop her off at the parks and continue going to work. He didn't ensure that she was supervised there. He didn't even warn the parks about the violent behaviors that he was seeing from his daughter. He didn't allow them to take allow the parks to take the safety precautions that would be necessary. Now, you heard that this came to a head on August 18th, when the two were left alone. Now, the parks had left Sydney alone before, and they'd never had a problem. But this time, Jesse was there, and Jesse wanted to play with that real gun. So they got the combination, and they went to the safe. They opened the gun and took it out. They went to the living room, sat down on the couch. Jesse took that gun, he loaded the revolver, pulled it up, held his hand out like this, pulled back the hammer and shot the trigger. Sydney collapsed on the floor. Jesse decided to call her dad, and unfortunately help was too late because they decided to stay on the phone for 7 minutes. The only reason help was ever called is because the neighbor decided to come over when she heard the bang and offer help. Jesse fired that deadly shot. As a plaintiff today, we have a burden to show you a couple of things. We have to show you that Hayden Duran had a duty to watch over Jesse Duran. You saw that today in the direct of Dr. Solo. You heard about the steps that a reasonable parent would be expected to take and how Hayden Duran did not take these steps. We have to prove 1 of 4 instances today to you where he did not take those steps. One of those steps was to properly admonish Jessie whenever she had an act of violence or whenever she used firearms. You didn't hear that today. One of the other steps was to teach her that firearms are dangerous. If you look back at trial, there was no evidence of that. The other thing we had to prove, or one of the other things we could have proved to you today, was that Hayden Duran made no effort to ensure that somebody was watching his daughter when he was away at work. The last thing we could have proved to you today is that he failed to warn the parks so they could make every step to keep their daughter safe. Now we have to also prove that because of this and these causes, they were a direct and proximate cause of Sydney's death today. You heard that from Sebastian, that because of Jesse's actions, Sydney is now dead. And you heard from the other witnesses that because of Hayden Duran's poor parenting of Jesse Duran, This violence wasn't stopped, and he escalated to this point. Now, in court today, you heard a couple of witnesses. The main individual you heard from was Jesse Duran. Now, the only thing, you heard a lot from Jesse Duran, but you also heard a lot of contradictions. You heard that she contradicted herself in her statement, saying that it wasn't just her idea, but that was also Sydney's. She said, but that's not what she wrote in her original statement to the police. Now, you also heard that she contradicted herself in the fact that she said she didn't load the gun. You heard from Mr. Sebastian that hers were the only prints on that bullet. And you also heard contradictions from her own witness, the defense's own witnesses. You heard from Mr. Chapman that, in fact, the phone, she put it in her pocket. She didn't drop it on the floor. You also heard from DeRosa that the defense did not supply her with the evidence, that Jesse had actually looked at the information the day before, that Jesse didn't have any knowledge previously of how to operate a gun. Now let's talk about the affirmative defense that the defense is bringing today. You heard from Mrs. Park that she took every step in terms of gun ownership. They brought an expert here today to tell you the only way to keep a gun safe is to put the gun in a locked room, in a locked safe, to keep the bullets in a separate safe, in a separate room, locked away, and then that you also had to not write any of these combinations down, and you also had to keep them completely random. That is the only way to have a safe gun ownership. But we have to think about what's reasonable in today's case. The Parks bought the best safe in the country. They kept the combination away, hidden in a drawer, unlabeled. They didn't even tell their daughter they owned a gun. They kept the bullets in a separate room. They kept the gun unloaded. They took every reasonable step. Unlike Hayden Duran, who did not take any reasonable step that should be expected of a parent to watch over her daughter. And because of that, Sydney Duran is not here. It was because of Hayden Duran's actions, his ability to ignore the violence of Jesse Duran, that we are here today. Find Hayden liable.
Do you want to read the defense procedures closed in?
Sure.
May it please the court, Your Honor, members of the jury, the safety wasn't on. With every decision Andy and Lee Park made, the safety was not on. It's a hard story to hear. It's a tragic tale, a loss of a child at such a young age. However, it's not the story that the plaintiff has told you today that paints the entire picture. They brought you today elements of negligence and fault in the behalf of Hayden Duran. They allege there are signs that he should have seen coming years before the incident. On the other hand, the plaintiff had their own part. The plaintiff had their ability to keep the gun safe and locked away, safe in their home, away from the two 11-year-old children they left unattended that day. In order to prove negligence, parental supervision, negligence on the part of Hayden Duran, the plaintiff had 5 elements they had to prove, each and every one today, by preponderance of the evidence, meaning that each one is more likely than not to have happened. First, the plaintiff should have proven that Hayden Duran did or should have known about a specific danger of Jesse Duran's behavior. Next, they should have proven that the defendant failed to act in a way in accordance with the behavior. Next, they were supposed to prove that Jesse acted in a way that was reckless, negligent, or intentional. Fourthly, they had to prove that the third party, being Sydney Park, did suffer harm as a result of these actions. And fifth, they had to prove that the harm was the direct and proximate cause, both, of the harm suffered by Sydney Park. So, going back to the first element, the signs. The signs that Dr. Solo testified so frequently about. The signs he said there could be 50 or 60 of, yet he only found 4 in the years prior in Jesse's behavior. In an opening statement, they promised you a suspension of a week, fights in school, and behavior that they were not able to produce today in court. They failed to meet their burden on this issue because it simply was not there. There was nothing to show. Next, they had to prove that Hayden Duran failed to act in accordance with the behavior exhibited by Jesse Duran. Did they not show, do we not show today, that Jesse Duran was often instructed by his father about the specific dangers of firearms? The video games they played together, Hayden would often sit with Jesse playing them together. There was supervision involved when Jesse had contact with violent video games. Now, the next key element was the fifth one. The plaintiff had the burden today of proving that the acts of Jesse Duran and the omissions or acts by Hayden Duran are the direct and the proximate causes of the harm suffered. Now, what is direct and proximate cause? Proximate cause, to compare it in more simple terms, is the domino effect. The domino that if you remove, there is no final result. In legal terms, it's called the but-for test. If it were not but for the actions of Hayden Duran, the plaintiff alleges this accident would not have happened. But what was the key element in the accidental shooting today? Was it not the gun? Was it not the gun that the plaintiff had, that Sydney and Jesse had access to because of the actions of the Parks family? Their negligence in keeping that gun properly stored. If there is no gun, there is no accident. Even if Jesse Duran were not present on August 18th and Sydney Park had played with the gun because she had such easy access to it, we could be in the same situation with the same loss of life. Jesse Duran and Hayden Duran are not, their actions are not the proximate cause of the harm today. Also, the defense brought today an affirmative defense. An affirmative defense that says the actions of the plaintiff are actually more at fault for the harm suffered today than the actions of the defendant. You heard today from Dr. Bashir. Dr. Bashir, who gave us clear reasons, clear methods to follow on how to properly store guns. The evidence showed these were not followed. While the plaintiff may have thought they were being reasonable in what they did, they took the easy way out. They just bought a safe, wrote the combination down quickly, put the bullets in an unlocked garage on a low-hanging shelf where the children could easily access them without any thought. If the plaintiff has met their burden in your minds today on all 5 elements individually, you must then consider the affirmative defense. We have met the burden of affirmative defense by showing you that it was ultimately Andy and Lee Park that armed the children that day. It is a hard story to hear, and we thank you, members of the jury, for sticking with us today. There's been a lot of emotion today, but it's important that we sort out the causes, the elements, and the legal responsibilities we have to solve today. No gun, no accident. The safety was off when the Parks kept the gun in a safe in their bedroom, unlocked closet. The safety was off when the combination of that safe was in a room in a file cabinet where Sydney Park was allowed to spend most of her time unsupervised. And the safety was off when the bullets that ultimately caused the harm were kept in the open, in no safe whatsoever. With each decision that the Parks made, the safety was off. I ask that you do not find Hayden Duran negligent in today's case. Return a verdict for the defense. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Your Honor?
Sure.
Today's case comes down to foreseeability. Could Hayden Duran foresee the actions of his daughter, or could Andy Park foresee the implications of her actions? Now, you heard today that Hayden Duran knew that Jesse knew there was a gun in the Parks home, and that he wanted to play with it. Yet he left his daughter there, all home alone, unsupervised, and did not warn the Parks. And because of this, Sydney and Jesse were able to play with that gun, and Sydney is now dead. Hayden Duran did not take the steps that a reasonable parent should be expected to take. While Andy Park took the steps that a reasonable gun owner would be expected to take. They did buy one of the best safes. And they made sure to put the combination in a separate drawer, hide it away, leave it unlabeled, and hide away the bullets. And Andy Park would be unable to foresee that that gun would be used. She had no idea that her kids wanted to use that gun. Hayden Duran, however, knew that they intended to use it. They intended to play with it. Now, the defense today brought affirmative defense to your attention, but the judge will instruct you that as a jury, you have a very important job. It's your job when you go back to the jury room and you look over this affirmative defense, that when you come back out, you'll have to go to Andy Park and look her in the eye and tell her that it was her actions here today that resulted in the death of her daughter. That it was her actions, as opposed to Hayden Duran. It's to those of Hayden Duran. But today was actually a case about a parent who ignored the signs, not about a parent who took all the steps. Find Hayden Duran liable.